Welcome back to Decouple. Today I'm joined by Marco Visscher, a freelance writer and editor from the Netherlands. He has co-authored two books, Ecomodernism, a book introducing eco-modernist ideas to a Dutch audience, and De Energietransitie, the energy transition. He's currently working on a book about nuclear energy as well. Marco, you're also a fellow podcaster, the host of Studio Ecomodernism, with a large audience in Netherlands and Belgium. After butchering some Dutch there, I'm going to just ask you straight up, hoe gaat met jou?
Chris, het gaat goed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Welcome aboard. I spent a little bit of time in Netherlands many years ago, and there's a few words I really liked. One of them was binderkaas, which is peanut butter. Anyway, it's one of the things that stick with you over the years. But we have some kind of serious matters to discuss. Your work caught my eye. We'd had a little discussion offline because you've been digging around, looking a little bit at, what's going on in Belgium, looking at this sort of maybe revolving door between politics and certain nefarious energy companies, or at least fossil fuel energy companies, and their influence on European energy policy with regard to nuclear, and I guess also fracking as well. I've just been following along a little bit what's been going on with Gerhard Schroeder, former chancellor in Germany, who went on to be a manager of the Nord Stream 2 board, nominated to the board of Gazprom in February of 2022. Bad timing. Apparently his entire staff just resigned. He's been expelled from his political party. Honorary citizenship of his hometown Hanover has been revoked. These are interesting times. We're focusing on Belgium. And there are, I've heard certain, I don't want to call them conspiracy theories, but I've heard certain allegations that, Gazprom has been funding environmental groups in the EU. I don't know if we have evidence on that, but I've been sort of calling it, I guess, more the banality of climate hypocrisy, building off of Hannah Arendt's work on the banality of evil here. But the story, in some ways, I think, is at least the ones that are easily traceable or accessible to journalists and researchers like yourself are sometimes quite banal. So I think that's what we're here to discuss today: the interesting case of the Belgian energy minister, Tin van der Straten. I have robbed you of your chance for your self-introduction, though. So let's make sure we tick that box. You don't get off easy. Tell us a bit more about yourself, Marco.
Sure. So I'm a journalist and editor in the Netherlands. I used to work for, I guess, an alternative magazine. I wrote a lot about sustainability. Anything green was, like this big hooray story in our magazine. I got a little bit more critical over time, I guess. Learned about the Breakthrough Institute and ecomodernism when it was still, I think the word ecomodernism was just coined by Ted Nordhaus and Michael Schellenberger. And I got more interested. Then back home in the Netherlands, I wanted to do more with ecomodernism, co-authored this book you just mentioned. And I guess I just like to write books and edit stuff. And if I didn't like that so much, I guess I would be like a professional magician, though I don't know that many tricks yet. And I'm here in Rotterdam with my wife and our 3 kids. In the Netherlands, just one of the brave countries that just decided to actually start building nuclear power plants.
Right. I mean, what a sea change we're seeing in Europe right now. I've been following, certainly France's announcement and that runoff election now, where it looks like 72% of the country has voted for candidates who are very much in favor of nuclear energy. Where in the UK, they're starting, sounds like some kind of a state-run vehicle to facilitate the building of 8 nuclear reactors, building 1 per year instead of 1 per decade is the sort of slogan. And you're mentioning, in Netherlands, are there committed plans now to get building something?
Yeah, the cabinet was formed in December, and part of it is to prepare the construction of a nuclear power plant. Now, this will take many, many years, of course, for all the permissions to get arranged, but still, it's a step beyond. Let's research nuclear. The point has now been made, to actually start building.
And it's interesting as well when the rubber meets the road. When there's a OPEC energy crisis, governments and industry come together to figure out how to make this happen. I mean, energy is just so critical, and with not just the energy crisis, but the Russian aggression in Ukraine, and I guess the European Council's imperative to get itself off of Russian fossil fuels in 5 years. I mean, it is interesting. Things that we did not think were possible or imaginable. I mean, a conservative government in the UK saying we're going to create some kind of a state enterprise, and the details are still very hazy on this. But for me, that's kind of shocking. This, the birthplace of electricity deregulation is got the renewable asset base financing model back, and is really looking at a role for the state in terms of stewarding along a sector that's vital for energy security and for climate, et cetera. So who knows how fast things can move along when there's actually an urgency. We would have thought climate would be that urgency, but often it's much more pragmatic things like a dictator invading a country and threatening.
Yeah, and this liberalization of the energy market, I guess that was from the 90s or so in Europe. Like nothing much has changed, right, in the energy mix since that decision to liberalize it. And in a liberalized market, it's just very hard to get nuclear off the ground, I guess. It's much cheaper, of course, to construct wind and solar and just keep going on with fossil fuels. So yeah, it would be good that governments step in a bit more here. Yeah.
So, I mean, Belgium is one of the places where there's pretty extraordinary news coming out. I mean, they haven't announced a full reversal of their plan to shut down all 7 of their reactors and 50% of their electricity generation. They've backtracked on that, not again because of climate, which they proclaim to be so concerned about, but because of the price shocks of the energy crisis and the Russian aggression in Ukraine. But 2 reactors are going to be delayed, at least in their closure. But let's
10
paint
years.
the context. In 10 years. Okay. Yeah. And who knows what happens after that? We'll see. Right. But we did talk to Rob de Schutter many months now about the situation in Belgium. But let's kind of flesh that out a little bit more, and let's introduce this character, Tin van der Straten, to understand that context of that partial reversal. And I guess just to get a better sense again of that sort of banality of hypocrisy when it comes to climate, and this attempt to shut down nuclear and replace it with gas.
Sure. So Tinne van der Straten, she came to the public. How you say it? She became a public figure, I guess, in 2003. This was after the Greens were part of the cabinet in Belgium. This was when when the Greens were in the government around 2000, they arranged this nuclear phase-out, including a constitutional ban on constructing new nuclear power plants for electricity production. But then elections came 2003, and the Green Party got smashed, I guess is the word, right? They were down very, very low. So they had to start a renewal. Tinne was one of the young, new, bright faces of the Green Party. And in 2007, she became elected and a member of parliament. And she left early in 2010, I think, and started her law firm, serving clients in the energy sector and petrochemicals, I believe. And this was a small law firm, right? It's called Blixt. She worked with a partner, Tim Vermeer. Tim used to work for Windgas, which is a subsidiary of Gazprom, right? And I think he worked for Eni, right? One of the largest oil and gas companies. And, with their law firm, I guess they served many clients in the energy sector. Meanwhile, Tinne, being a known politician and a face of the Green Party, even though she left, she got, interviewed in the media, in newspapers. She wrote op-ed pieces, and she would be saying things like, where do I have it here? So she would be talking about the very big problems when nuclear power plants would shut down. She would say, energy production from renewables fluctuates all the time, and natural gas can work quickly and nicely along with solar and wind, ramping up and down as the weather changes. Let's see, in another interview or op-ed, she would applaud the government for ordering natural gas plants. She would always say, "Oh, it's only a couple gas plants, right? They're only temporarily. It's a tussenstap, an intermediate step, like a bridge or a transition." But what does that mean? Like everything is temporarily, right?
Right, everything breaks
in
down,
life.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's so interesting because I think across the world you see this up until probably around 2010, 2012, maybe up until fracking really took off. Natural gas was really really popular, as a quote unquote transition fuel, as a sort of a partial climate solution. And around the world, from what I'm seeing, green groups were taking considerable money from the natural gas sector, partnering with, in my country, Suncor, Enbridge Gas, other groups. But I mean, you see this in the States as well, where Sierra Club took a very large, multi-million-dollar donation from several gas companies. And when I've confronted, anti-nuclear activists here about their past of taking gas, they say, "Well, listen, I mean, everyone was doing it then. I mean, you have to understand the situation's changed, and it is pretty extraordinary." I mean, thank God, finally, there's some chutzpah here. Or this, people are starting to wake up to this, but maybe not. I mean,
Yeah, but then again, I mean, we should be. Let's look at this from a different perspective, I guess. So, are you familiar with the effective altruism movement? Trying to do most good with limited resources, right? I'm familiar with this work of the pragmatic vegan, and so if there's a dilemma, I don't eat meat, but if a meat company would offer me $1 million to spend on animal welfare organization for eating a burger, I would eat that burger and then donate 1 million, right? So, I mean, I can imagine green groups would accept money from the natural gas company. I mean, they got lots of money, so why don't we take it and we'll spend it on the stuff that we enjoy? So, I mean, it's not so much that they're being bribed, I think. It's just that their solution, solar and wind, is very much dependent on natural gas. So it fits the green agenda in a way, fits the fossil fuels agenda. And that's, I think, the more interesting story, actually.
Totally. And I don't mean to, I think it's very uninteresting when you characterize, your opponents or characterize anyone really, right? It's far more fascinating with what you just did there, where you try and get into the psychology and, how people kind of wrestle with these moral questions and come out feeling right about the things that they do. I mean, human beings, that's just, I think, fundamental to our psychology, is we always have to justify and see ourselves in a good light and as doing something positive. And what's interesting is that story we tell ourselves, that justification. So I love it. I love it. Carry on.
Well, I mean, you say justification. That's eventually what happens, right? If you're so much against nuclear power, ultimately you end up justifying the use of fossil fuels, right? This is what happens, because when nuclear power plants shut down, they will be replaced by fossil fuel plants, usually natural gas plants. So this happens all the time. Shall I go further with Tinne van der Staten's bio?
Yeah.
So, because it was 2019, I think, when she returned in politics. So she stopped her work for this Blixt law firm. She came into the parliament, and then the next year, after elections, she became the Minister for Energy. As a member of parliament, she arranged, what's the word? I guess a support mechanism, like 350 million euros, I think, for the construction of natural gas plants, because they were needed for the rationale for nuclear power plants to shut down. There had to be, one of the conditions was that the electricity supply would not be endangered. And that's why you need natural gas plants, right? So that's what she arranged as a member of parliament. And then as a minister, she went to the European Commission asking for subsidies to actually start building these the natural gas plants. Now, all this looks a bit suspicious, right? And I'm seeing these kind of articles. Actually, Michael Schellenberger, our mutual friend, wrote about this as well. And it is enough, to raise eyebrows, I guess. Um, but does this mean Tinne van der Straten was a lobbyist, that she was paid by the fossil fuel industry to make her point? I don't know. I guess she was, as a lawyer, she was probably working for some of the fossil fuel companies. We don't really know because it's not disclosed. They don't need to disclose it. I guess that would be bad for competition, right? If you list all the companies you work for, it would be very easy for a competing law firm to pick up the phone and make a better deal. So we don't know for sure.
We do know that Wingas did have work for this company Blix, though, the Gazprom subsidiary.
Well, I think so. Tim Vermeer, this was the one partner that Tinne was working with. He used to work for Wingas. He's saying that on his own website, and just being proud of it, I guess, because it's very much part of the bio. Tim Vermeer has a profile that's a bit less public, I think. But he's written a few op-eds as well, like saying, we need to invest in new natural gas plants, saying subsidies will be needed, praising the government for building natural gas plants. He would even say natural gas plants are clean, efficient, and flexible. Now, that's what a lobbyist would say, right? Is he a lobbyist? Is Tinne a lobbyist? I don't want to go that far, but I think an anti-nuclear stance ultimately makes you sound like your fossil fuels industry's little helper in a way, right?
And in terms of asking for these subsidies from the EU to build gas plants in Belgium to replace fossil-free, carbon-free nuclear with natural gas, I remember there being some justifications around, this is not actually going to increase emissions in Europe because we'll do some fancy carbon trading with Poland, maybe. Do you remember any of the details around that? Like the contortions that people have to kind of jump through to hold these positions while claiming to be green and climate concerned?
Yeah, well, I don't know too much about it, but it just doesn't seem right to say, oh, we can build fossil fuel plants. It's the people in Eastern Europe, they need to, or I don't even know what their reasoning is ultimately, but probably these plants in Eastern Europe will be more polluting than they are in Belgium or the Netherlands, right? So,
I mean, Mark Nelson talks about the ways in which the energy ministries of several European countries have sort of fallen to pieces from the kind of people that used to run them, people with actual real qualifications, engineers and grid planners and things like that. I think the energy ministry in France is now the Ministry of the Ecological Transition, which is interesting for a file that's so vital. But Tin van der Straten, she's a lawyer. She has a degree in African studies. What qualifies her for this role and to make these kind of decisions? Like a history in law with a legal firm that's kind of worked heavily for the fossil fuel industry, and that's about it, I guess. Right? There's no. Like this for me, it's just it boggles my mind because when we're concerned about climate, it's two sides of a coin, and if you are not deeply studying energy transition, the history of energy transition, if you're not reading your Václav Smil, for instance, you're liable to make some enormous errors, and we're constantly told we have limited time, limited resources, and to be for the blind to be leading the blind in a sense, and my prior life 3, 4, 5 years ago, I was completely energy literate. I had no understanding of this side of things. I would have been very much led along by the blind. It's just it's shocking.
Well, I see what you're getting at, Chris. I think we shouldn't diminish people who have an Africa study for not being energy literate. I mean, this is something she's probably learned over the years that she was running her law firm, right, serving energy clients. That means you get to know the nitty-gritty of all the infrastructure and the political regulations, I guess. You see what works and what doesn't. If you have an appreciation for technicalities, I guess you can major in Africa studies and still understand energy,
Sure,
right?
sure. No, I think that's a fair point. I'm a doctor here who's waxing eloquent about energy. I mean, I have no formal training in that background, so thank you. That is a very fair point.
But I guess her background at the Green Party just makes her compelled to support solar and wind, right? Because what else is there? They don't like coal. They don't like natural gas. They say they don't like oil. Everything should remain in the ground, keep it in the ground. Over here in the Netherlands, there's quite some criticism of biomass, so they don't like biomass either. Well, big hydro projects in the Netherlands, you don't get very far with hydro, of course. But big hydro is not a good idea either. So what do you end up with ultimately? It's solar and wind, right? But they don't work by themselves. And what do they need? They need natural gas. Nobody's really talking about it, but that's what you end up with.
My Netherlands pumped hydro joke is that you just have to open up a dike instead of building a reservoir at elevation. You just simply flood behind a dike, an area below sea level, and you can pump it back out when you have copious amounts of electricity to spend, but maybe less favorable. Yeah, I mean, so in terms of sort of maybe closing off the episode. Are there any sort of the recent developments, I guess, right? This decision to delay the closure of 2 of the 7 reactors in Belgium. Have you been following that closely? How has that decision come to be made? How is it being received in your opinion within Belgium and within Europe more broadly? I mean, Germany has not. Germany has held fast. It's not going to make a difference. We're carrying on with their phase out, and we're talking about these 8 there's 8 reactors coming in the UK and in Netherlands. I mean, when I was talking with some Finnish friends, they were saying, it's just such a tragedy to us because we're doing our part. We're bringing on, an EPR, I think 1,600 megawatts of carbon-free power, and the Germans are just, busily throwing away. This was before the closure of the German 3 last year. I mean, throwing away 8 point something gigawatts. So it's, it's this treadmill decarbonization that I think Siver Wayne came up with. It's a real source of frustration, but I mean, certainly it's powerful to see Belgium kind of forced into this position. And again, not for climate concerns, but for, cost, price, and
geopolitics. Well, when people get polled in Belgium, and people get a question, do nuclear power plants emit CO2? A lot of people will actually say that yes, nuclear power plants emit CO2, right? This is what they see on the pictures when they see the cooling towers. That must be CO2, spewing into the air, right? Rather than water vapor. So I guess the level of knowledge could still increase in Belgium. I do also know from pollings taken over the years that support for nuclear in the general public is a lot larger than it is in politics. So in politics, you see few parties, I think, make a case for nuclear, really trying to keep it. I think there's only one party actually doing that, but I'm not entirely sure about that. So in politics, it's much more. I guess politicians are a little bit scared about nuclear. They probably think that there's a lot of opposition. They assume opposition, I guess. Whereas if you look at the polls, that's quite some support, right? More people support nuclear than oppose it. This is true in the Netherlands as well, very strikingly, actually. So I don't know. And then when this decision came to extend the life, this life extension for these 2 nuclear reactors in Doel, and one in Tihange, I think it was pretty mildly received, but I'm not entirely sure. You should ask Rob de Schutter and have him on the show again, I guess, to know for sure. But, the nuclear phase-out in Belgium has been postponed so many times, right? The decision was all the way back from the year 2000, I believe. Same year that Gerhard Schröder, who joined Gazprom, was also calling for this for the nuclear phase-out in Germany. So, and it's 2022, right? I mean, and well, some of it has happened, I guess, in Belgium with the shutting down of some of these nuclear reactors. Yeah, but who knows? Maybe shale gas would be something that actually get started now, right? In Europe. I mean, this is this other story that green groups were under the influence of, of Putin and his cronies, I guess. For opposing fracking in Europe, and again, it sounds like this fantastic story, right? Oh, these green groups, they're not only bribed by the fossil fuel industry, they're just Putin's puppets, right? And yeah, again, I'm not so sure if that's part of it. So there's been some research done, right, about green groups like Sea Change, I think, in the US, and there was this other one, Energy Foundation, I believe, perhaps supported by Russian energy firms, including Gazprom, I think, through some, Bermuda tax haven kind of construction, right? I don't. Yeah, from a business perspective or a government perspective, I guess, from Russia, it makes sense, right?
Means, motive, opportunity, right?
Yeah. And this is what happens everywhere, I guess. If Russia has so many, such gigantic gas reserves, they will be worth less if Europe starts fracking and gets this shale gas up. So it might be there. I did find something from the NATO chief, Anders Rasmussen, back in 2014 in The Guardian. He was saying, I have met allies who can report that Russia, as part of their sophisticated information and disinformation operations, engaged actively with so-called non-governmental organizations, environmental organizations working against shale gas to maintain European dependence on imported Russian gas. Now, I guess Rasmussen, he's not a nobody, right? So there must be some reason. Matt Ridley actually wrote about this too on his blog, with headlines he mentioned from Russia Today, just calling fracking like raping the earth, etc. These kind of things. Gazprom Germany lobbied the Bundestag, so the German government, German parliament. This could all be true, right? This is what happened as well when nuclear started. This may be a sidestep now, but once in the very beginning, nuclear was this disruptive technology, right? In the, say, 1950s, it got so much support in the US with President Eisenhower making this Atoms for Peace speech. There was this whole nuclear industry taking off. And back then, it was the coal industry, of course, trying to maintain its position. Oil was coming up as a producer of electricity back then, mainly. It all makes sense that these fossil fuel companies then start to wonder, what can we do to, block this disruptive technology that may, change the whole energy sector? And there have been, there's this work by Rod Adams. You have him on. You had him on the show. Your show, right? Yeah.
It's very interesting, the not in my backyardism around like a comfort with Russian produced natural gas and a revulsion at European produced fracking. I'm someone who thinks that it's a tragedy and a crime to be especially burning natural gas as baseload electricity when it's also a critical feedstock for things like fertilizer, and we're going to be reaping what we've sown there in terms of our botched energy policies. It's looking like food prices are skyrocketing, and we're headed for not just a brief little blip, but potentially several years of real pain here. And food shortages make things real, and they make a lot of political instability. I'm very worried about that. But the idea that we've been creating a policy where we're burning a vital feedstock for world agriculture, or shutting down nuclear plants and burning what has been called sort of the food of food, in the way that natural gas fuels the Haber-Bosch process and creates so much of the world's ammonia fertilizer. It's a real tragedy. I think humans are smarter than that, or we should be, and hopefully we can change course. And sometimes what's required is not the threat of climate change, but something a little more real. I think, like an energy crisis and a war of aggression, which we feel compelled to respond to. So
yeah, it seemed like climate change was not enough, or so, right? We needed apparently something else to actually reconsider some of the energy choices made. Yeah. And I get it. It's not so much that the anti-nuclear folks like fossil fuels so much. I don't think so at all. It's just that they're not so much aware, or maybe not even so much interested in the consequences of an anti-nuclear position, right? Even if it results in the use of more fossil fuels.
Whether it's accidental or just, de facto fossil fuel lobbying as a result of that position. I mean, the results don't change, but I do really like what you brought to this discussion, Marco, in terms of uh, having a sort of empathy, and trying to understand, again, the motivations, reasoning, rationale, justifications of the people making what I think you and I see as really shockingly bad decisions. But I do thank you for that, because I think it's really important if we're to have a politics which actually gets somewhere, where we realize that we have to collaborate across the political spectrum, with urgency to challenge the problems that arise ahead. We need to move beyond a politics of hyperpolarization and caricaturization towards really understanding each other's moral taste buds that drive our political choices, and understanding the rationalizations that we can make, so we can argue with the ideas and not with the symbols and the personalities and the people. So
I couldn't say it better, Chris.
yeah, I mean, thank you for coming on, and I think presenting a pretty sort of compassionate profile of Tin van der Straten, who's um, yeah, well, we've kind of described what she's been up to, but thank you, Marco. It's great having you on, and I look forward to more chats in the future, having you back on at some point.
Thanks, Chris.